that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to
Today's headlines spotlight the high-stakes August 15, 2025 meeting in Alaska between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, a summit lasting nearly 3 hours, described by both as extremely productive, yet ending with no formal ceasefire or concrete agreement on Ukraine. Despite
we were together almost 3 hours, and it was very extensive, and we agreed on a lot of points. I mean, a lot of points we agreed on. But there's not that much. There's, one or two pretty significant items, but I think they can be reached. Now it's really up to President Zelenskyy to get it done. And I would also say the European nations, they have to get involved a little bit. But it's up to President Zelenskyy. I think we are, and if they'd like, I'll be at that next meeting. They're going to set up a meeting now between President Zelenskyy and President Putin. And myself, I guess, I didn't ask you about it. Not that I want to be there, but I want to make sure it gets done. And we have public
gestures, a military flyover, limousine escort, then cordial demeanor. Critics argue that the summit served more as diplomatic theater than a breakthrough toward peace. Trump himself conceded there's no deal until there's a deal, highlighting the lack of insider substance. What does it say about modern diplomacy that such highly visible summits can produce so little concrete outcome? Is symbolism becoming more powerful than substance? Let me know what you think in the comments. On the heels of that summit, President Trump urged Ukraine.
The high-stakes meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska aims to address the ongoing war in Ukraine. While Trump is optimistic about achieving a breakthrough, Putin is also seeking for nuclear arms control agreement. Hoping to have a good meeting with Putin, Trump says he hopes to save many lives, while emphasizing that a second meeting with Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be more crucial.
I'm doing it for that reason. We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens. And I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelensky will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great. I've solved 6 wars in the last.
Finalizing the details of the upcoming summit in Alaska, Putin held a meeting with his close associates, praising Trump administration's efforts to end the Ukraine crisis. Putin hoped the two leaders could reach an agreement on nuclear arms control in safeguarding world peace.
The current American administration is making quite energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities, stop the crisis, and reach agreements that are of interest to all parties involved in this conflict, in order to create long-term conditions for peace both between our countries and in Europe and in the world as a whole, if at the next stage we reach agreements in the area of control over strategic offensive weapons.
According to Putin's aide, both leaders will hold a one-on-one session with interpreters who will be present there, followed by delegation talks and a working breakfast. The Russian delegation will include senior officials such as Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Defense Minister Andrei Belosov, and Finance Minister Anton Silonov. accompanied by expert teams. After the talks, Putin and Trump will hold a joint news conference to summarize the negotiation results. The Kremlin says the agenda will largely focus on Ukraine peace talks, with broader global security and economic cooperation also being discussed. Meanwhile, hundreds of demonstrators gathered in Anchorage in Alaska to demonstrate the meeting between Trump and Putin. While some expressed disappointment over the exclusion of Zelenskyy at the meeting, many expressed skepticism about the summit's potential to bring any kind of peace in Ukraine.
The idea that this war criminal and felon and what we're now calling the American president is here together. The fact that Putin is in this country at all, and the fact that Trump thinks he can negotiate anything. He can't negotiate himself out of a paper bag. The fact that they're here has me here objecting.
Ahead of the Alaska summit, Russia and Ukraine have conducted a prisoner exchange, releasing 84 captives from each side. The swap was mediated by the United Arab Emirates. Russian Defense Ministry said that the freed Russian service members will receive medical treatment and rehabilitation in Russian military facilities. And well, with all eyes on the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska, WION spoke with a slew of experts on possible outcome of the Alaska summit and if they think a ceasefire deal can be reached upon. Listen in.
The current tactical advantage that the Russians have achieved near Pokrovsk is one that is a fairly tenuous one. It's one that the Ukrainians probably have the capability to push back, and it is indicative of a seesawing of the battlefield. The incremental advances that Russia has been able to achieve in the last few months have been at a huge expense materially and in terms of people's lives lost and maimed. So the strip of land that's been captured recently through infiltration tactics and adaptation of use of drones in an innovative way has given them some confidence. But as I say, it's a very tenuous hold, and the Russians have not demonstrated the ability to actually master the full spectrum of offensive and then grab and hold, defensive and counterattack tactics and techniques to hold off a counterattack from Ukraine, mindful that this is quite a narrow strip of land, and Ukraine has a big stake in making sure that they get pushed back.
I don't think it would be enough to get a peace now either, because in the Ukrainian constitution, the whole of Ukraine is undividable. But in the Russian constitution, it's the same, and they have annexed Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Donetsk, Luhansk. So they can't leave it, but it could become a ceasefire so that the front line were frozen. At least they could start discussions about a ceasefire. I believe that Russia would like to continue its rather successful offensive for at least a week more.
In the immediate aftermath of the Putin-Trump meeting, there will be a discussion with Zelenskyy, a discussion with Europeans. Will the Ukrainians be somewhat more willing to compromise, to work with Trump and Russia to get a deal if they're losing ground in eastern Ukraine? Yes. I think this breakthrough is an important development in the overall diplomatic landscape. The Ukrainians do face manpower shortages. They do face weapons shortages. And this breakthrough is a sign of the asymmetries that exist on the battlefield. So the timing is not good for Zelenskyy because it weakens his hands when it comes to a possible land swap in eastern Ukraine, as well as the overall nature of the deal that's struck, particularly what is the status, what is the independence, what is the sovereignty of the 80% of Ukraine that is likely to remain on the other side of any ceasefire line, the part of Ukraine still controlled.
And its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, to step up and finalize terms. Trump implied key progress hinged on Kyiv's approval. In response, Zelensky expressed readiness for constructive diplomatic engagement and is now set to travel to Washington, D.C., for direct talks with Trump. Meanwhile, European leaders reiterated that Ukraine's sovereignty must remain intact, warning Russia cannot veto Ukraine's aspirations for EU or NATO membership. If peace depends on Ukraine agreeing to land swaps or security guarantees, how much compromise remains acceptable before it threatens Ukraine's sovereignty? I'd love to hear your perspective below. Across continents in West Africa, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore declared, "It's not terrorism. It's imperialism," criticizing French media as part of an ideological effort to maintain neocolonial control.
Les terroristes, ils sont renforcés par beaucoup de combattants étrangers qui viennent d'ailleurs, qui ne sont pas en fait, quand je prends le cas du Burkina, il y a beaucoup de criminels qui sont au Burkina mais qui ne sont pas burkinabés. Il y a aussi des formateurs qui viennent de beaucoup de pays pour les apprendre beaucoup de techniques.
Mais quel est leur intérêt?
Mais ce n'est pas du terrorisme en fait, c'est de l'impérialisme. L'objectif pour eux, c'est de nous maintenir dans une guerre permanente, qu'on ne puisse pas se développer et continuer à piller nos richesses. Aujourd'hui, les terroristes utilisent des drones pour faire le combat et tout. Donc ce sont des professionnels venus donc, de certains pays qui viennent les apprendre tout ça. Tout ça, c'est pour continuer à nous maintenir dans une situation d'insécurité. Mais nous prenons la mesure de la chose, nous nous adaptons à chaque fois à leur mode d'action et nous continuerons le combat jusqu'à récupérer l'entièreté du Sahel. Regardez dans les discours, même le président français, toujours dans ses discours, les jeunes Africains sont influencés par la Russie. Il le dit. Les médias occidentaux, vous les écoutez souvent, ils ne passent leur temps qu'à mentir. Et regardez aujourd'hui l'AES qui est un modèle qui est en train de se dessiner. Ils ne peuvent pas se lever du matin au soir sans parler du Burkina ou parler de l'AES. C'est impossible pour eux. Et chaque fois, ils cherchent à envoyer des informations pour diviser, pour manipuler la jeunesse. Mais ça ne passe plus. Je pense que les gens sont assez...
This rhetoric reflects broader patterns of entrenched disinformation and anti-Western narratives, some fueled by AI-driven campaigns and propagated by the regime's propaganda apparatus. Although reshaping media discourse and rallying nationalist sentiment, such messaging also exacerbates ethnic divisions, legitimizes authoritarian rule, and fosters deep instability across the Sahel. When leaders frame internal conflicts as struggles against imperialism, how should we separate genuine anti-colonial sentiment from propaganda? What role do you think media literacy plays in that differentiation? Share your thoughts below. Today's global landscape reminds us that true peace and genuine understanding cannot be forged through optics or rhetoric alone. Whether it's a high-profile summit with no concrete results, behind-the-scenes diplomacy needing full stakeholder participation, or nationalist narratives stirring deeper currents of discontent, the stakes remain real, far-reaching, and urgent. As we keep following these developing stories, the common thread is clear: meaningful resolution requires more than spotlight moments. It demands inclusive dialogue, transparent negotiation, and critical awareness. Stay tuned, for there's much more to explore, unpack, and question. Let curiosity guide us, and may our pursuit of truth always inspire positive change.